Hi, my name is Daniel, and in this short video I will show you what it feels like to use the self-service portal in Azure DevTest Labs as a developer or a tester. So this is the second part for this video series on Azure DevTest Labs. I already did the theoretical intro. If you don't know what Azure DevTest Labs is all about, go check that out. In this video we're going to focus on the user experience for a user of the Azure DevTest Lab. And after that, there will not be another video showing the capabilities when it comes to administration of an Azure DevTest Lab. So let's go to the Azure portal. I'm here in the Azure portal and I'm already in my DevTest Lab. So DevTest Lab is just a resource in the Azure portal that has been created for me. In that case, as I'm the user of the DevTest Lab and not the admin, and not the owner, but just a regular user, a tester or a developer that wants to use the Azure DevTest Lab. I don't know anything about the setup, and we don't care about this in this video. Instead, we concentrate on how to use it. So as a user of Azure DevTest Lab, I can access the Azure portal with portal.azure.com, and then I can choose the lab that I have been invited to. That's what I've done, and this is what I get, this nice UI here. As you can see here, I have some menus on the left, and in the middle I see some resources, obviously machine names or some kind of environments with weird names, and we will go into details what that is in a few seconds. The only thing that I normally wouldn't see is that part of the configuration in the lower left here. That part is something that we don't focus on right now in this video because it's something only administrators see. Because I have a demo setup where I am the user and the admin, obviously I can see this, but normally as a user you wouldn't see this part, you would only see the upper menu items. Let's dive right in. So the idea of Azure DevTest Labs is that you have the chance to create machines or environments or some kind of services in Azure where you regularly wouldn't have the permission to do so. So within that lab you can do it because, well, it's just a lab. So if you want to spawn up let's say a new virtual machine, all you would have to do is go to add and then pick, based on a bunch of templates that somebody provided, pick the right one that fits your needs best. So all you see here, those templates you can see here, they were selected by the administrator of that lab, and they are the set of tools you have to work with. There are three kinds of bases you can choose here. For one, it's images. In that case, it's all gallery images. Gallery images means that the administrator of the lab decided that it's a good idea to offer you a virtual machine image as a basis for an image, as a basis for a machine that you can create yourself. On top of that, there are formulas. Formulas are a comfort feature that makes it more easy for you to spin up a virtual machine. Within a formula, there's configuration for a specific virtual machine image. So if you want to have a specific configuration for a virtual machine, let's say a virtual machine with a specific operating system with a specific number of CPU cores and a certain amount of RAM, all of that can be baked into a formula. If you want, you can add some additional required software that you want to have on that machine, which could also be baked into that formula, and then you can just select the formula to spin up your machine. The third option that you have, and probably the most powerful, is that the administrator of that lab provides Azure Resource Manager templates that can allow you to spin up complete environments in Azure. So, as you might know, all infrastructure resources and all services in Azure can be defined via Azure Resource Manager templates. So if the administrator of your lab decides that specific Azure Resource Manager templates shall be provided, that basically means you are allowed to spin up your own instance of a specific service. And as you can see here, we have, for example, an Azure Web App sample here as an ARM template, or an Azure Web App with a SQL Server, or two nodes, therefore two virtual machines which are connected to a specific VNet and therefore can talk to each other via network. So it's more than just a single VM that you get. You really get a lab environment, the lab environment you need to get your work done best. Let's start simple with the virtual machines down here. If I need a dev box, let's say I'm a .NET developer and need a dev box, I could, for example, choose the Visual Studio Enterprise running on Windows 10 here. If I'm a Java developer who wants to work on, for example, Ubuntu, then or some kind of Linux distribution, of course, I could choose just another Linux-based image from the selection we have here. Once again, this selection is pre-selected by the administrator of the lab. This is what I have to work with. So let's just, for example, choose the Windows image here, and then you can see that you can do some specific settings. I think that kind of dialog is probably well known, because if you have ever spawned up a virtual machine in any kind of platform, you've probably seen dialogues like that. You have provided a username, you have to provide a password, but that's interesting. See, you can say you want to use a saved secret. This is something to remember. We can, as users, save passwords or some kind of secrets within a key vault provided by DevTest Lab, so that we don't have to type our passwords all over again. We can just reuse them to spin up virtual machines. I can pick a machine size. Let's dive in here. So I see, okay, there's only one size. If I remove the filter on small, I see there I have 3 sizes in total that I can pick from. The selection here is limited to only 3 choices because the administrator of the lab decided that the biggest machine I can get is the DS5 machine, which has 16 cores and 56 gigs of RAM. So within those boundaries, I can freely select which kind of machine I want right now. I will just stick to the DS3 for now, and I can say if I want to have a standard disk, or if I want to have something faster. And for development purposes, it's probably a good idea to have something faster, especially when it comes to high disk I/O load, for example, during compilation. And additionally, I could also say, on top of that virtual machine that will be created for me, I want to have certain software as artifacts installed. And I can pick from a list of software. Again, that list of software is being pre-provided or pre-selected by the administrator of the lab. So, for example, I could say I want to have Chrome, and I just add Chrome. And maybe I also want to have Visual Studio Code, and I just add Visual Studio Code. And all of that sounds pretty good to me, good enough. And then I see I can just pick that. I don't have to care about the installation. I can really just pick those entries, and after my machine will be created, automatically the installers for those software packages will run, and I will have access to the machine only after all the installation has been done for me. So there's no need for me to install something manually if I have an artifact for that. Additionally, I could say that I want to modify, for example, the network that this virtual machine shall live in. Which networks are available is, of course, again a thing that the administrator of the lab has to define and specify. But then I could, for example, pick a specific network. That specific network might be connected or peered to another network that might have a connection to your on-premise network. That's possible technically, but it doesn't have to be. It depends on how you want to work. Do you want to work totally isolated, maybe with more permissions on the machine than you have typically within your company's network? Then it's good to have full isolation. Maybe you need access to local resources. Then it's good if you can set up a network connection and have access to those local resources. It's all possible. It's just a matter of how the lab is configured, but we don't really care about that right now because we're more from the user point of view right now. I can choose if I have a public IP or a private IP for my virtual machine. Of course, this is also something that is important when it comes to certain security aspects. I could say that this virtual machine shall expire. Now that's interesting. So I'm a developer, I want to test stuff, and I install the build of last night or something like that. Then probably this machine gets kind of stale if the build is a little old and nobody really needs that machine anymore. So I could set a kind of an end date or expiration date, for that machine, and after that I can't access the machine anymore. I could also say that I create that kind of machine multiple times. So let's say I want to provide my whole team with that kind of machine because I want all of us to work on the same configuration. Then it's sufficient if one person does all the configuration and then it simply says, okay, I want to create multiple instances of that machine, let's say 10, and I make this machine claimable. And making it claimable means that somebody else can go into the lab and can say, oh, there's a machine that already has been pre-created for me. That's nice. I just take that. I don't have to go through the whole dialog here. So, but as you see here, whoops, you cannot exceed the limit of 5 virtual machines that are created in this lab. So I get a notice here that I, as a user, I'm not allowed to create more than 5 machines. And this is, again, a setting that the administrator of the lab has done. And of course, as he's the administrator, I have to stick to the policy. Therefore, I could, at a maximum, choose 5. The thing is, I already have some running. So even 5 would be too high right now, but that doesn't matter. You will see that in a second. Going back to the basic settings dialog here, all I now have to do is hit create, and then it will take 3 minutes or so, and I have my virtual machine up and running. So it's really pretty simple. Now let's skip the creation of that virtual machine and instead go back to look at what it looks like if I have that virtual machine. We see here 3 machines running or existing already. 2 of them are stopped. 1 is running. If I want to connect to that virtual machine, I just hit the virtual machine and say, okay, now please connect to that virtual machine. And now if I hit connect, what happens under the hood is that the RTP connection, as you can see here, will be downloaded to my machine. I will have the RTP file, and I can then say I want to connect via RTP to that virtual machine. In certain scenarios with certain setups, I wouldn't directly connect to the virtual machine, but I would maybe instead use an RTP gateway or a bastion host, some other way to connect to that virtual machine. But this is more advanced. This is really the simplest way to do it. And as you know, if you open the RTP file, you have to provide your password. Well, the password in that case was stored, as we've seen. So just to give you that dialog, as you've seen here, DanMikes001 would be the machine name. It's also already pre-selected. DanMikes is my name here in the lab, and the username, and the password I have to provide here would be the password that I just specified for creation of that virtual machine. So, and then I can click OK, and I will get my RTP session and can start working on that machine. For Linux machines, of course, I can simply use SSH to connect, or some kind of RTP for Linux, like XRTP or whatever. So that's for the virtual machines. Probably you are aware of how to work with virtual machines already. So let's go one step back to the creation dialog. I hit create again, and this time I don't want to pick a virtual machine, but instead I say I want to pick a formula. And for example, I will now pick the .NET Dev box based on Windows. And those formulas have been created maybe by the administrator of the lab, or I could also create my own formulas as a user of the lab, which is kind of exciting because then I can specify some settings that I'm using all over again. So let's dive in here. And we see now the configuration for that formula. And of course, the formula always has an virtual machine image as a basis. So in that case, that base is Visual Studio 2019 running on Windows 10 Enterprise, just as we picked before. But you see, already some settings have been done for me, like a username has been set, password has been pre-selected, a machine size, a specific machine size has been chosen, which is not the default size. Premium SSD is also already pre-selected, and 5 additional artifacts have already been installed. So once set up, a formula is really a thing that allows me to create a new virtual machine with my configuration, the configuration that I need with a single click. And going from there, the rest of the all-over experience is exactly the same. I will connect to that machine via RTP or SSH, and then I find everything that I have installed into that machine. So that basically means if you decide within your company on some specific tools that all of you want to use, then all you have to do is to provide a base image and create a formula. And then all of you have the same configuration on their machine running. Okay, now let's go back to the third chapter. And the third chapter would be if we don't go with images or formulas, which ultimately both will provide you really only virtual machines. Another option would be that you want something else. Cloud is not only virtual machines. Cloud is also platform services, which means that there are some services running on Azure that give you the chance to write in your preferred programming languages, and what you get is a managed version of that framework or that runtime that you need. And you don't really have to care about the underlying operating system. You don't really care about the hardware underneath. And all of that is considered as platform services. And those platform services are, for example, stuff like Azure Web Apps or stuff like serverless functions and so on and so on. And maybe during development or during testing, you need an instance of a web app to test something because you want to see how communication goes or whatever. Or you want to just make sure that the software you're writing actually does what it's supposed to do because you want to do some modifications or experiments. In that case, what you need is a so-called environment in Azure DevTest Labs. And for those environments, somebody has to provide a Azure Resource Manager template, and then based on the templates that have been provided, you can pick and choose which resources you want to see running within the lab. So in that case, there have been some templates been provided, 7, and one of the templates, for example, would instantiate a web app. Another one would instantiate a web app with a SQL database. Now, if you think about that, a web app with a SQL database, that would kind of require that somebody creates the web app, somebody creates the SQL database. The idea of Azure DevTest Lab is here that there's one person who needs to do that, and that one person can kind of define standards that shall be used within your enterprise. And then everybody else who's using the labs can just use that standard and work with that exact configuration, but on his or her own instance. If you take a look at web apps with an MySQL database, that probably could be complex to set up for somebody who's not very experienced with Azure yet. With Azure DevTest Labs, things are made very simple because all you really have to do is provide some values for parameters that are required. And everything else is already pre-baked into the Azure Resource Manager template. And you can see that here, that within Azure DevTest Labs, if you use that Azure Resource Manager template here to spin up an environment for web apps with MySQL, all you have to provide is an environment name, and login name for the database administrator, because obviously we have a database if you have MySQL running, and a secret so therefore a password for the database administrator. And so you don't have to type passwords all over again because you can here again refer to our secretly saved password in Key Vault. So all you have to do now is hit add, and this will create and spawn up a web app with MySQL for you. So these are the three different options that you have. All of those resources will then later on be found here within the this dialog. The dialog title says My Virtual Machines. That's kind of misleading because we now know that actually it's not only virtual machines, it's all kinds of resources, because certainly there are machines when you use a gallery image or some kind of formula, but there might also be PaaS services, other infrastructure services, whatever you choose. And as you can see here, I have already pre-deployed a web app, and I already have pre-deployed the virtual machines here. The nice thing is that, of course, for the virtual machines, I can configure that, for example, I want to have a specific auto start or auto shutdown time. Let's say I start working very early in the morning at 7 o'clock, and I want to make sure that my machine is already running at 7 o'clock when I start sitting at the desk. And I also want to make sure that it shuts down automatically at 6 p.m. so that even if I forget to shut it down, there will not be any cost associated with that virtual machine over the night, because in fact it's a developer machine, nobody will be using it. So I can specify that. I can say I want to have the auto shutdown at a specific point in time, in that case 7 o'clock p.m., or I can say I want to have it auto started. So in this case, auto start is disabled, and I can also not configure it, and the reason for that is that this is something that has actually been set by the administrator of the lab. So it's out of my control, but that's fine. I can still I want to start it up manually, but of course maybe my administrator already configured the system so that for every day I will have the machine started automatically. Maybe during development at some point I want to have the same machine running, but I wish for more power, for example, for more RAM or for a stronger, more powerful CPU. Then I can still scale the machine. So I could go here and say I want to pick a different size now for that machine, and of course, the size that I can choose here is still based on the sizes that the administrator pre-selected for me. In this case now I have a DS3 machine running, but I could, for example, say, okay, I want instead a DS5. I could select that, and the size of the machine would be changed under the hood. So this is kind of what it feels like working with machines. One additional artifact that might be interesting is that I can also, for running machines, modify the artifacts. So I could click here and say I want to still, even though the machine is already running, I want to still pick one of those artifacts that are available, so that I don't have to do the installation manually. And if I like the configuration of my machine as it is right now, I can, for example, also say that based on the configuration that I've chosen during installation, I now want to create a formula for that, so that I can basically reuse my configuration without having to go through all the dialogues again. Coming back to the overview dialog, what we see here is another dialog for claimable virtual machines. I mentioned that already. Maybe somebody else created virtual machines which are out there to be used by everybody else in the lab. I could find them right here and could just say, okay, I pick them up and use them, and then those machines will be brought into the My Virtual Machine menu. With all virtual machines, I see all virtual machines in the lab. In my case, there's not too much going on because I'm the only user. I can investigate security alerts for my environments I have running. So in case the security center of Azure finds something interesting, I will get informed right here. I can have specific data disks. So if I want to have disks that I don't want to lose if I shut down a virtual machine, then I could integrate them here and mark those disks to be permanent and not bound directly to a single VM. Of course, I have my own storage of formulas. I mentioned the formulas already. And then we have those secrets that I mentioned also already, kind of a password store that I can use. And under the hood is using Azure Key Vault to really make sure that your password will not get lost. So that's Azure DevTest Labs from the user perspective. It's really simple to get started because the dialogues and the user experience is pretty good. There's not too much you can do wrong. And if you're looking for a way to spawn up virtual machines or environments or other Azure services in a really simple way in a dedicated testing and lab environment, Azure DevTest Lab is exactly what you need. This was my really quick introduction to what it feels like working with Azure DevTest Labs. If you want to learn more about how you can configure it, either check my next video or go to aka MS Azure DTL. Thanks for watching.